Commander Vexthul sat in his command chair aboard the massive warship Dread Talon, his forearms moving across holographic displays as he reviewed the morning's contracts. The Cathara Syndicate was the most feared mercenary organization in the galaxy, and for good reason. They had never failed a mission in over 200 years. The latest job seemed almost too easy. Some upstart species called humans had been causing trouble for the Galactic Trade Consortium, hijacking spice shipments and disrupting carefully planned trade routes. The bounty was impressive: 50,000 galactic credits per human captured alive, 20,000 for proof of termination. Easy money for the Syndicate's battle-hardened warriors. Vexthul's intelligence officer, a thin Zalathi with pale, blue skin, approached with a datapad. "Commander, here's the full briefing on these humans." "Tell me about their military capabilities," Vexthul said, not bothering to look up from his tactical displays. "Primitive kinetic weapons, basic energy, shields, outdated propulsion systems. They've only been space-capable for 50 standard years. Their homeworld is called Earth, located in a backwater system that most civilized species avoid." Vexthul finally glanced at the report. The humans looked unremarkable: bipedal mammals with soft skin and no natural weapons, no claws, no armored hide, no poison glands. They seemed almost fragile compared to the warriors the Syndicate usually faced. "What's this about persistence predators?" he asked, reading a highlighted section. The intelligence officer waved dismissively. "Xenobiological nonsense, Commander. It means they used to chase their prey over long distances instead of using proper hunting techniques. Hardly relevant to modern warfare." Vexthul scrolled through more details. The humans had some unusual behaviors, according to the report. They formed strong emotional bonds with their crew members, often refusing to abandon wounded comrades, even in hopeless situations. They showed remarkable creativity when faced with technical problems, frequently finding solutions that defied conventional engineering wisdom. Most puzzling of all, they seemed to perform better under stress rather than worse. "Sir," the intelligence officer continued, "these characteristics might actually work in our favor. Emotional attachment makes them predictable. They'll try to rescue their friends instead of making smart tactical decisions." The commander nodded, remembering past victories. The Thrakari berserkers had been fierce warriors, but their rage made them sloppy. The Zenith hive minds were perfectly coordinated, but once you disrupted their central communication, they collapsed like a house of cards. Every species had weaknesses, and the Syndicate had learned to exploit them all. 3 systems away, Captain Minho was having his morning coffee in the cramped galley of the freighter New Busan. The ship wasn't much to look at: patched hull, plates, jury-rigged systems, and the constant hum of an overworked life support system. But she was fast, reliable, and had carried his crew safely through dozens of dangerous runs to the Outer Rim colonies. Hyejin, his navigator, slid into the seat across from him with a worried expression. She had been monitoring galactic communication channels all morning, picking up chatter about increased mercenary activity near their planned route. "Captain, we've got a problem," she said, activating a small holographic display. "I'm seeing at least 12 unknown ships gathering near the Kepler Junction, military-grade signatures moving in formation." J1 looked up from his engineering reports. The young man had been tinkering with the ship's systems again, trying to squeeze more efficiency out of their aging reactor. "Could be a coincidence. Lot of traffic goes through Kepler." Nyon, their weapons specialist, shook her head. She had been a soldier before joining Minho's crew, and she recognized the signs. "Those aren't merchant vessels. Look at their positioning, their setting, up an interdiction pattern. Someone's planning to stop ships coming through that route." Minho studied the tactical display, his mind already working through possibilities. They were carrying medical supplies and food to the colony on Rim's edge, a settlement that depended on regular deliveries to survive. The colonists had been waiting for 3 months already, and people were starting to get sick. "We could take the long route through the Epsilon Nebula," Hyejin suggested. "Add maybe 10 days to our journey." 10 days those colonists don't have," Minho replied. He thought about the children he had met on his last visit, bright faces that reminded him of his own daughter back on Earth. "Besides, whoever's out there is probably expecting us to run scared." Nayeon leaned forward. Captain, if those are syndicate ships, we're talking about professional killers. They've been doing this for centuries. We're just freight runners. Minho smiled, but there was something cold in his expression that his crew had learned to recognize. It was the same look he got when someone threatened his people or tried to push him around. Back on Earth before he left for the stars, Minho had grown up in the mountains of Korea, where his grandfather had taught him that sometimes the only way to deal with a bully was to hit back twice as hard. They think we're just freight runners, he said quietly. That's their first mistake. Jaewon, what can you tell me about our cargo manifest? The engineer pulled up the shipping records, mostly standard supplies, medical equipment, food processors, water purification systems. But we've also got 3 tons of mining charges for the colony's expansion project. Mining charges? Nayeon's eyes lit up with professional interest. High-grade explosives. Industrial grade, Jaewon confirmed. Stable under normal conditions, but they pack quite a punch when properly triggered. Minho's smile widened. His grandfather had also taught him that the best weapons were often the ones your enemy didn't see coming. Hyejin, plot us a course straight through Kepler Junction. Make sure we look like we're trying to sneak past them. Captain, Hyejin said nervously, are you sure about this? If we're wrong about who they are, we're not wrong, Minho said firmly. And even if we are, I'd rather fight than spend the rest of my life running scared. These outer rim colonies depend on us. The kids on Rim's edge are counting on the medicine we're carrying. I'm not going to let some mercenary scum decide who lives and dies out here. He stood up and looked at each of his crew members in turn. I won't order any of you to follow me into this. Anyone who wants to take an escape pod and head for the nearest safe port, I'll understand. Jaewon was the first to speak up. Those colonists helped rebuild my hometown after the earthquake of '89. I'm with you, Captain. Nayeon checked her sidearm and nodded. Someone needs to teach these mercenaries that humans aren't as soft as we look. Hyejin sighed and began plotting their course through the junction. Well, if we're going to do something crazy, at least let's do it right. As the new Busan changed course toward what might be their final battle, none of them knew they were about to change the galaxy's perception of humanity forever. The trap was perfectly set. Commander Vexthul watched from his flagship as 12 Syndicate warships formed a deadly circle around the 3 human freighters that had just dropped out of hyperspace at Kepler Junction. This was supposed to be routine. Overwhelming force, quick surrender, easy credits. The humans were outnumbered 4-1, outgunned by weapons that could crack planets and facing warriors who had conquered half the galaxy. Human vessels. This is Commander Vexthul of the Kithara Syndicate. His voice boomed across all communication channels. You are surrounded and outmatched. Power down your engines, prepare for boarding, and you will be treated according to Galactic mercenary protocols. On the bridge of the New Busan, Captain Minho looked at the tactical display showing red dots surrounding his small convoy. The other 2 ships were the Seoul Express, captained by his old friend Donghae, and the Incheon Runner, commanded by a tough woman named Sunmi. All 3 ships carried critical supplies for the outer rim colonies, and all 3 captains had families back on Earth who were counting on them to come home. Galactic mercenary protocols, Nayeon muttered, checking her weapons console. That means slavery or death, depending on their mood. Hyejin's hands flew over her navigation controls, analyzing their options. Captain, they've got us boxed in completely. No clear hyperspace routes, and their weapons are already locked onto Ku. Curse, Minho opened a channel to the other 2 ships. Donghae, Sunmi, you still with me? Till the end, old friend. Donghae's voice crackled through the static. My grandfather didn't survive the war just so I could surrender to some alien thugs. Sunmi's response was shorter, but just as determined. Let's show them what Korean stubbornness looks like. Instead of responding to the Syndicate's surrender, demand, Minho switched to his ship's internal communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We're about to do something that's either brilliant or completely insane. Jaewon, I need you to start separating our cargo containers. Make them ready for emergency jettison. Captain, Jaewon's voice came from the engine room. Those containers aren't designed for space combat. They'll just float around uselessly. Not if we give them some direction, Minho replied with a grin that his crew couldn't see, but could definitely hear in his voice. Remember those mining charges we're carrying? How hard would it be to rig them as proximity detonators? There was a pause as the young engineer's mind caught up with his captain's plan. Oh, that's either genius or suicide. Maybe both, Minho admitted. But I'd rather go down fighting than live as a slave. Vexthul was growing impatient. The humans should have surrendered by now. Any rational species would recognize hopeless odds when they saw them. Instead, the three ships were doing something strange. Their energy signatures were fluctuating wildly, and his sensors were picking up unusual activity throughout their hulls. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the human ships appear to be reconfiguring their internal systems. I'm reading power rerouting on a massive scale. Probably trying to boost their shields," Vexthul said dismissively. "It won't help them. Open fire with warning shots. Let them know we're serious." The Syndicate ships unleashed a barrage of energy, bolts that passed close enough to the human vessels to overload their sensors. It was a standard intimidation tactic that usually prompted immediate surrender. Instead, something impossible happened. The humans fired back, but they weren't using conventional weapons. Instead, cargo containers began launching from all three ships, spinning through space like massive bullets. At first, the Syndicate warriors laughed. How could shipping containers possibly threaten military-grade warships? Then the containers started exploding. Each one was packed with mining charges that had been hastily rigged with proximity sensors. As they detonated near the Syndicate ships, the explosions sent clouds of metal debris racing through space at incredible speeds. The mercenaries' shields, designed to stop energy blasts, were suddenly facing thousands of high-velocity projectiles. "Impossible," Vexthul breathed as he watched his tactical display. Three of his ships were already showing critical damage from what should have been harmless cargo. But the humans weren't finished. Hyejin had done something that violated every safety protocol in the Galactic Navigation Manual. She had rerouted their life support systems to create a massive electromagnetic pulse. The new Busan was suddenly broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously, jamming communications and confusing targeting systems across the entire battle zone. "Sir, we're getting conflicting sensor readings from all directions," his navigation officer reported, panic creeping into her voice. "The humans are using their own life support as some kind of electronic warfare system." Jaewon, meanwhile, had turned the new Busan into something that would have given safety inspectors nightmares. He had linked the ship's engines to the cargo launch system, using their propulsion to fire containers with pinpoint accuracy. Each launch was perfectly timed to coincide with the electromagnetic pulses, making it nearly impossible for the Syndicate ships to track incoming projectiles. Nayeon was coordinating the entire chaotic battle from her weapons station, but she wasn't using any weapons manual the Syndicate had ever seen. Instead, she was treating the fight like a three-dimensional chess game, constantly adapting their tactics based on how the mercenaries responded. Every time the Syndicate tried to adjust their formation, the humans had already moved to counter. "They're not fighting like any species I've ever encountered," Vexthul's tactical officer said, her voice filled with disbelief. "Their tactics keep changing. Every time we adapt to their strategy, they're already doing something completely different." The battle lasted only 20 minutes, but those 20 minutes changed everything. When the chaos finally ended, the space around Kepler Junction was filled with debris from 8 Syndicate warships. The humans had lost all 3 of their freighters, but somehow, impossibly, they had taken down 2/3 of the attacking force. The surviving Syndicate ships limped away from the battle zone in stunned silence. Vexthul stared at his tactical display, trying to understand what had just happened. These weren't trained military officers. They were cargo haulers, merchants, ordinary people who should have died in the first 30 seconds of combat. "Commander," his intelligence officer said quietly, "I think we need to revise our assessment of these humans. Run a full analysis of their homeworld," Vexthul ordered, his voice hollow. "I want to know everything about where these creatures come from." The response that came back an hour later made his blood run cold. Earth wasn't just another inhabited planet. It was classified as a Class 12 death world, a designation reserved for planets so hostile that the Galactic Survey Corps considered them uninhabitable by intelligent life. "Sir," his intelligence officer continued, reading from the official report, The planet has gravity 50% higher than galactic standard, an atmosphere that would be toxic to most species, and predators that hunt in coordinated packs. The dominant life forms evolved through constant warfare with their environment. Vexthul finally understood why 3 cargo ships had just destroyed most of his fleet. The humans hadn't learned to fight from military academies or warrior traditions. They had learned to fight from their own planet, a world that had spent millions of years trying to kill everything on it. And now those same survival instincts were loose in the galaxy. The old soldiers started talking, and their stories changed everything. Earth wasn't just a dangerous place. It was like the universe had built a world specifically designed to destroy anything that tried to live there. Picture this. The air pressure on Earth would literally crush most alien species flat. Just breathing. There would be like having a giant weight pressing down on your chest every second of every day. The gravity was so strong that visitors from other worlds couldn't even stand up properly. They'd be pinned to the ground, helpless as babies. But that was just the beginning. Earth had predators that worked together like military units, wolves that hunted in packs, coordinating their attacks with the precision of trained soldiers, big cats that could stalk their prey for miles without making a sound. And the humans. They were right there in the middle of it all, not just surviving, but thriving. The mining station Kepler-7 became the perfect example of what these Earthborn humans could do. When the Syndicate forces attacked, everyone expected it to fall within hours. The station only had a small crew, mostly civilians who worked the asteroid mines. But 2 of them, Donghyun and Jisoo, decided they weren't going down without a fight. For 18 straight hours, these 2 humans held their position against an entire assault force. The Syndicate threw wave after wave of trained soldiers at them, but somehow these miners kept fighting back. They took hits that should have put them in the hospital for weeks and just kept going like nothing happened. Jisoo got shot in the shoulder early in the fight. Any other species would have been done for the day, maybe permanently disabled. She just wrapped it up with some torn fabric and kept shooting. Donghyun took shrapnel to the leg that left him limping, but he still managed to outmaneuver Syndicate soldiers who were supposed to be elite fighters. The really crazy part wasn't just that they survived, it was how they fought. They didn't have advanced training or special equipment. They were just regular people who worked in space mines. But they moved like they'd been preparing for this fight their whole lives. They used every piece of the station as a weapon or shield. They turned mining equipment into booby traps. They knew exactly how to make their limited ammunition count, taking shots that seemed impossible, but somehow found their targets every time. When they ran low on supplies, they improvised with whatever they could find. The Syndicate soldiers started getting nervous. These weren't supposed to be warriors. These were supposed to be easy targets, soft civilians who would surrender at the first sign of trouble. Instead, they found themselves fighting people who seemed to have an answer for everything. One of the Syndicate commanders called for backup twice during the assault. His troops were getting picked off by 2 injured humans who should have been overwhelmed hours ago. The psychological effect was devastating. If 2 random humans could do this much damage, what would happen when they faced actual human military forces? After the dust settled, word spread through the criminal networks. A grizzled old Korth veteran named Kexthal, who had seen combat across dozens of star systems, tried to explain it to his crew. He'd been studying these humans since their first appearance in galactic affairs. "Listen carefully," he told them, his 4 arms gesturing dramatically. "These humans didn't just get lucky. They evolved on a world that spent millions of years trying to kill them every single day." He pulled up images of Earth on his display screen, massive storms that could level entire cities, earthquakes that split the ground open, volcanoes that turned day into night, floods that reshaped entire coastlines in hours. Every day on that planet was survival training, Kexthal continued. Every meal had to be earned through something they call persistence hunting, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Every problem they faced meant innovation or death. There was no middle ground. The crew stared at the images in disbelief. This wasn't a planet. It was a torture chamber designed by a sadistic universe. The atmospheric composition alone should have killed them, another veteran added. The oxygen levels are toxic to most species. The temperature swings would fry or freeze anything else. And somehow, they not only survived, but became the apex predators. The syndicate's reputation started cracking like thin ice. These weren't just stubborn fighters who got lucky a few times. These were the products of evolution's most brutal testing ground, shaped by millions of years of constant threat and challenge. Every human carried the genetic memory of ancestors who had fought saber-toothed tigers, survived ice ages, and built civilizations from nothing but determination and raw intelligence. They were living weapons forged in the cruelest laboratory the galaxy had ever produced. The criminal underworld began to whisper a new truth. Earth hadn't produced tough humans by accident. It had created them on purpose. Vexthal was getting desperate. The contracts were falling apart, his reputation was crumbling, and worst of all, other crime bosses were starting to laugh at him. He decided to throw everything he had at the human problem, calling in his most specialized and deadly units. First came the Zenith Swarm. These aliens operated like a single massive brain controlling thousands of bodies. They moved in perfect coordination, sharing thoughts instantly across their entire force. No single fighter could stand against them, because they literally thought as one unified mind. They'd overwhelmed entire planetary defenses by simply drowning them in perfectly coordinated attacks. But when they faced Taehyung and his small defense team on the Outer Rim mining colony, something strange happened. The humans didn't try to match their coordination. They broke it completely. Taehyung had been a communications officer before becoming a colonist. He understood how information flowed and how to disrupt it. Instead of fighting the Zenith directly, he fed them false intelligence through captured communication equipment. He made them think his 12-person team was actually a battalion spread across multiple positions. The beauty of it was brutal in its simplicity. The Zenith's greatest strength, their shared consciousness, became their greatest weakness. When Taehyung's team fed false information into their network, every single Zenith soldier believed it instantly. They started repositioning to fight enemies that didn't exist, leaving their real positions completely exposed. Within hours, the Zenith were shooting at shadows, while the humans picked them off from positions they never expected. The hive mind that had conquered dozens of worlds was defeated by one human who understood that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make your enemy fight themselves. Next, Vexthul sent in the Thrakari Berserkers. These were the galaxy's most feared close combat specialists. They'd been genetically modified for aggression, pumped full of combat drugs, and trained to feel no pain. When they went into battle rage, they became unstoppable killing machines that would literally fight until their hearts stopped beating. The Thrakari thought they'd finally found opponents they could understand. Humans seemed to fight with similar intensity, showing the same willingness to ignore injuries and keep pushing forward. This should have been a fair match between two aggressive species. They were completely wrong. The humans weren't fighting. In rage, they were fighting with cold, calculated survival instincts. Every move was purposeful. Every risk was measured. When a Thrakari berserker charged forward in blind fury, the humans simply stepped aside and let momentum carry their enemies into traps they'd prepared hours earlier. The berserkers found themselves fighting people who had turned survival into an art form. Humans didn't just ignore pain. They used it as information, letting it tell them exactly how much damage they could take before they needed to change tactics. They fought like predators who had spent millions of years learning exactly how to kill efficiently while staying alive themselves. But perhaps the most disturbing reports came from the interrogation centers. The syndicate had always prided itself on being able to break anyone. They had drugs that could crack the strongest minds, torture techniques that had been refined across hundreds of species, and psychological warfare methods that had never failed. Then, they captured Somin. She was just a cargo pilot who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Nothing special about her background, no military training, no special resistance conditioning. She should have broken within hours and given up everything. She knew about human defensive positions. Instead, something incredible happened. Somin didn't break, she learned. Within days, she was speaking her captor's language fluently. She watched how they moved, studied their daily routines, and analyzed their security procedures. She asked innocent questions that seemed like the desperate babbling of a broken prisoner, but she was actually gathering intelligence on their weaknesses. When she finally escaped, she didn't just run. She sabotaged their communication systems, freed 3 other prisoners from different species, and somehow managed to steal critical intelligence about syndicate operations in the sector. By the time her captors realized what had happened, she'd already transmitted everything to human defense forces. The psychological impact was devastating. Syndicate interrogators started refusing to work with human prisoners. The word spread quickly through their ranks. These people didn't just resist torture, they turned it into a learning experience. Mercenary bars across the galaxy began buzzing with nervous conversations. Fighters who had faced impossible odds on 100 different worlds were now saying the same 2 words over and over. Too risky. The phrase became like a curse word in criminal circles. Jobs that involved humans went from premium pay to untouchable contracts that nobody would accept at any price. Unit commanders started reporting the same disturbing pattern. Their fighters weren't just scared, they were completely demoralized. These weren't ordinary soldiers they were facing. They were fighting an entire species that had learned warfare from their planet itself. One surviving Thrakari berserker, his body covered in scars from the failed assault, summed it up perfectly for Vexthul. We're not fighting an army. We're fighting an entire species that learned warfare from a world that spent millions of years trying to kill them. Every human carries the experience of surviving hell itself. The syndicate was fracturing and everyone knew it. Vexthul was backed into a corner, his organization crumbling around him. In desperation, he made what he thought was a brilliant tactical decision. If humans were so tough because they'd adapted to dangerous conditions, then surely they'd be weaker when fighting on their home turf. He decided to take the fight directly to Earth itself. He gathered the remnants of his fleet, 50 of the most advanced warships credits could buy, crewed by the deadliest fighters from across the galaxy. This wasn't just going to be an attack. It was going to be a demonstration. He'd show the entire criminal underworld that humans could be beaten on their own ground. The moment his advanced scouts entered Earth's solar system, they started sending back reports that made no sense. The high, 3rd planet from the Sun was supposed to be a normal world, maybe a little harsh but nothing extraordinary. What they found instead challenged everything they thought they knew about what made a planet habitable. The weather systems alone should have been classified as planetary-scale weapons. Hurricanes that generated more energy than some star systems were just called storm season by the locals. Tornadoes that could tear apart reinforced military bunkers were so common that humans had developed early warning systems and treated them like minor inconveniences. The scouts watched in disbelief as humans went about their daily lives, while electrical storms raged overhead that would cripple most starships. Lightning strikes that carried enough power to level city blocks were hitting the ground constantly, and people were just living with it. But the weather was nothing compared to the wildlife. Earth's creatures were like something out of a galactic nightmare database. The advanced teams detected predators that hunted in coordinated packs, each individual animal capable of taking down a fully armed syndicate soldier. There were sea creatures larger than some of the smaller ships in Vexthul's fleet, and flying predators with eyesight so acute they could spot targets from distances that exceeded military scanner ranges. The most disturbing part wasn't that these creatures existed. It was how humans interacted with them. Children played in areas where apex predators roamed freely. Farmers worked fields, knowing that animals capable of crushing armored vehicles lived just beyond the tree line. Fishermen went out onto oceans filled with creatures that could swallow their boats whole. And humans didn't just survive alongside these monsters, they'd turned many of them into companions. Dogs that could track scents across continents. Horses that could carry riders across terrain that would challenge military vehicles. Cats that hunted with such efficiency that they'd driven smaller predator species to extinction in some areas. When Admiral Seogen finally mobilized Earth's defense fleet, Vexthul got his first real look at what humans could do when they weren't just improvising with mining equipment and civilian tools. Colonel Unji coordinated ground-based defenses, while General Wubin managed orbital positions, and their teamwork was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. These humans fought like they'd learned tactics from every hostile environment their planet could throw at them. They used asteroid fields the way ground forces used forests for cover. They turned the gravity wells of planets into weapons, slingshotting their ships around celestial bodies to achieve impossible acceleration and surprise attacks. They fought in 3 dimensions like they'd been born in space, but with the cunning of predators who'd learned to hunt on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Every maneuver incorporated lessons from surviving in environments that would be considered uninhabitable death traps by galactic standards. The battle wasn't even close. Vexthul's forces found themselves fighting an enemy that treated the vacuum of space like just another hostile environment to be conquered. Humans moved through zero gravity like they'd evolved there, coordinated attacks across impossible distances, and demonstrated a level of tactical flexibility that came from millions of years of adapting to constantly changing threats. Within hours, the Syndicate fleet was completely outmaneuvered. Ships that had terrorized entire star systems were being picked apart by defenders who fought with the cold efficiency of apex predators. Vexthul watched 47 of his 50 ships get destroyed or captured, escaping with just 3 damaged vessels and a crew that was too terrified to speak. The news spread through criminal networks faster than light-speed communication. The Cathara Syndicate, one of the most feared organizations in the galaxy, had been completely destroyed by a species that most people had barely heard of just months earlier. Within 6 months, the Syndicate had completely dissolved. Former members scattered to the far edges of known space, and those who stayed in the criminal world refused to even mention humans in their conversations. The very word Earth became associated with certain death in mercenary circles, but the real change came in how the galaxy viewed these newcomers. Merchant vessels with Earth registry started traveling through sectors that had been controlled by pirates for decades, and nobody dared touch them. Trade routes that had required expensive military escorts were suddenly safe for any ship flying human colors. It wasn't because humans had the biggest weapons or the strongest shields. It was because everyone remembered what had happened to those who tested them. Word had spread to every pirate haven, criminal organization, and mercenary guild in known space. There was a new apex species in the galaxy, and they came from a world that made everywhere else look like a vacation resort. The phrase Deathworlder entered common galactic language, but it was always whispered, never spoken aloud. These weren't just tough fighters or clever tacticians. These were the survivors of a planet that had spent millions of years perfecting the art of creating the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered. Human ships now traveled freely through space that had been lawless for centuries, protected not by superior firepower, but by a simple truth that everyone understood. They were from Earth, and challenging them meant facing the products of evolution's cruelest testing ground.